Hello, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, college football fans across the nation and around the world. This is Tim May with the Tim May Podcast, and with the return of a very capable co-pilot for this flight, Andy Backstrom of LettermenRow.com, of On3.com. Welcome back to the Tim May Show.
So it was great, Tim. Thanks for having me on.
I thought maybe we were having a little bit of a delay there, but it was just you slowing the uptake. But that's okay, man. If I ask you to take the controls, I don't want you to hesitate, okay?
All good.
All right, man. Well, we'll get right into this. One of the things I like about you is there's not a lot of BS in you. The son of a well-known lawyer out there, you've learned how to clip your words, especially in a tight basis. And I appreciate about you, Andy, because we're going to talk about some things that need to get clipped and need to get tightened up for Ohio State headed into the season. This is sort of what I would call an evergreen podcast. Most of mine are, because I like to talk about situations in general, not just what's facing the world at this moment. But bottom line is, you and I both got a chance to talk to Ohio State assistant coaches a week ago as we record this, and you know, there's no secret. I've made no secret of the fact that I enjoy listening to and occasionally get to ask questions of Jim Knowles, and I think you're the same way, right? The defensive coordinator for Ohio State going into his second year with a few welts on his back about what happened at the end of the year last year, but wanted to get that all straightened up. But I find him to be a fascinating man. How about yourself?
Yeah, he's very candid, which I think we all appreciate in the media. Even after the loss to Michigan, I felt like he took the responsibility as he should have. And it seems like he's really taken a hard look at what went right last year, but also more importantly, what went wrong towards the end of the year. It was a much improved season for the defense, but ultimately in the biggest games, it collapsed. So he's done a lot of work on reframing his mindset on this defense. And I appreciate his candidness in these interviews that we have with him.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you before we get in before we get into the couple of segments that I've videoed there with him at the in basically the players' lounge upstairs at the Woody Hayes Athletic Center. You and I and a host of about 30 other guys were crowded around him there, and it's just interesting how he sort of holds court, because he doesn't waste a lot of words either. You know, he's and he gets a little in depth about a lot of things. Questions both you and I asked him and others did. But I just wanted to, you came on in November last year, switching over from Boston College to Ohio State with LettermenRow.com and On3.com. And just what was your take? Because you were getting to observe Ohio State with 4 games to go in the regular season, and then into the college football playoff. But what was just your take about the defense the last part of the season? You're always influenced by things you see immediately, and then how things go. And we saw a really promising, those of us who covered the entire season saw a very promising switchover in that defense, but it seemed to deteriorate in the latter part of the year. And just what was your take on it from just the limited view that you had of it as that season waned down?
Yeah, not a great 4-game sample size there, because really the only games in which the defense played well was against Northwestern, when it was raining and windy and no one could really create offense. Even Ohio State struggled with that. And then against Indiana, which is one of the worst offensive teams in the country last year. So the game against Maryland was really concerning for me, watching that defense, especially against the pass, struggle. And I think then again, we saw it against Michigan with J.J. McCarthy finding ways to dissect the secondary, exposing defensive backs who were in the wrong positions at the wrong times. And then again, of course, in the college football playoff against Georgia. Although the one thing I will say, probably the most promising part of this defense was the third quarter against Georgia in that Peach Bowl semifinal, because I felt like they really shut down Georgia in that quarter. And Jim Knowles even said last week that was probably their best quarter at the end of the season. What the problem was is that he stuck to what he was doing in that quarter for too long. Eventually, offensive coordinators will catch on, they'll make their adjustments, and that's what happened. and Jim Knowles just didn't switch quick enough to a different method in the fourth quarter. And that's why Georgia ultimately was allowed to get the better of Ohio State and make that comeback.
Yeah, it was a combination of a lot of things, and number one of which might have been, sticking with that scheme. The stuff he was doing there in the third quarter, maybe sticking with it a little too long, but also, you know, a slip by a defensive back. Wow, you may have the right defense call, but man, if a guy falls down, it doesn't really matter, especially if that's where they're going with the ball. And so it's always a combination, but it always comes down to players executing. And I know that's a tired refrain, but it's exactly that. And because I remember I was asking him about that. I mean, these were, well, people will hear it here during the interview, but what I was asking him about, this was Georgia, was maybe the most ballyhooed defense over the last two seasons. Well, they gave up 41 points to Ohio State in that game, so it was not a defensive masterpiece by either team. And yet when you lose, your foibles look a lot worse than the team that just beat you, but only beat you by 1 point, right? And that's kind of what you're dealing with in this modern game.
Absolutely. I mean, there's not much. I mean, there's obviously defense played in the college football playoff, but when you look at it on paper, it doesn't seem like they're playing much defense. And we talked about it a lot leading up to that Peach Bowl. Ohio State was going to have to score a lot of points to be able to beat Georgia.
Yeah.
It's just they didn't get the stops at the right time. If those stops had come in the fourth quarter and not the third, we're probably having a different discussion right now. And it's really interesting because when you look at the way people view defenses, if Ohio State had found a way to beat Georgia, and we all kind of believe that they would have beaten TCU pretty handily, then we're looking at the defense and we're celebrating this idea that they had a huge improvement. And even though they still probably would have given up close to 40 points or 40 points in the Peach Bowl, no one would be batting an eye. It's just like people look at Georgia and they praise a defense that has had several draft picks and has had several accolades, and they gave up more than 40 points in the Peach Bowl. But again, no one talks about that because they won a national championship for the second year in a row.
Okay, well, let's get to our interview with Jim Knowles, along with several other of our media colleagues a week or so ago, and this is a segment from it, a long segment, but a segment from it, and it starts off with, what are you going to do with C.J. Hicks, the guy who really showed out, I thought, in the spring, and really showed improvement, and really showed an ability to get to the ball and make plays. I mean, basically third or fourth linebacker, depending on how you want to size him up, with Cody Simon behind Tommy Eichenberg and Steel Chambers, and neither one of whom were available for full contact the last, Tommy Eichenberg throughout the spring, as he's recovering from basically, as you'll hear Jim Knowles refer to him, Tommy No Thumbs, because he got, I'm not laughing as in ha-ha, but I am laughing. I mean, you basically suffer two broken thumbs and you still play against Georgia. That's the red badge of courage right there. And then, of course, Steel Chambers was out with a little bit of an injury the last part of spring, didn't get to play, but you really saw the rise of C.J. Hicks, in my opinion, so much so that they've got to figure out a way to get him on the field. And as this interview begins, it's about Jim Knowles basically in his mind scheming already C.J. Hicks possibly playing in that jack role, that jack linebacker role is what I call it, along with Mitchell Melton, which will give them, in my opinion, much more diversity in this defense. And it is going to be curious, isn't it, Andy, to see if they can bring that jack role along this year, which you'll hear us talk about it during the interview. Kind of got put on the shelf to a certain extent with Jack Sawyer, because Jack Sawyer was basically out of position in that role last year, right?
Yeah, they want Jack Sawyer to be back in the dirt. They feel like it kind of delayed his development. They were hoping for a year two jump, which we've seen with a lot of Ohio State defensive ends through the years, but that did not happen. So they want to put him back down in the dirt, off the edge, and hopefully that'll be a better fit for him in terms of pairing him with JT Tuimoloau and having that pass rush be a little bit more accustomed to what Ohio State fans are used to here in Columbus.
Yeah, pairing. I mean, a four deep that includes Caden Curry and Kenyatta Jackson, along with JT Tuimoloau and Jack Sawyer. I'm really looking forward to watching that. Anybody who knows me knows I really truly believe what makes football is what goes on in the trenches, and whether you've got the guys there or not. And I think Ohio State is equipped to really make a huge rebound defensively this year. And one of the main reasons is because of the strength of that defensive front, the guys they've got returning both in the tackle spots and on the ends. But hey, let's get to this conversation, this interview with Jim Knowles, and we'll be back to discuss a few of those things. But ladies and gentlemen, Jim Knowles, second year defensive coordinator for Ohio State.
And I thought really came on at the end. CJ is a guy who, you know, I'm predicting sometime this season we're going to see him really unleash. You know, and the good thing is he's not pressed in the service because of the veterans in front of him, and I think that's helped him to be able to play more relaxed. But at some point this year, we'll be able to see CJ's athletic ability. I mean, I think he's just, you know, on the cusp of breaking out.
I asked Coach Mick which young guys were standing out earlier, and CJ was one he mentioned as someone whose maturity has really improved from last year to this one. How have you seen that grow for him?
Well, you know, you see it in everything. I mean, you just see it in how he learns, how he's able to articulate the defense and his assignment, how he does across the board in the classroom and just you know, being on time, being not just being present at the workouts, but being a leader. So he's had a really good off season.
Jim, when you say that there will be a moment when CJ might be unleashed, how will that logistically happen when he has an older guy ahead of him? Does that mean you're going to find opportunities in games where you're going to put CJ in? Would that be in the second half?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I think that is up to me. It's a great question because it's up to me to find some time, some things that he can do, you know, in the jack type of game, and also in those situations where we have the opportunity for him to play, you know, whether that's through a rotation, you know, me just saying, hey, I'm going to get him in every so often, because to move along a guy's progression, he's got to get played. So it's either me defining a role for him within the game plan, creating a substitution where I know I'm going to put him in no matter what or what the score is, or in those situations like you said where it's you know, a second half situation and he can really play a lot.
What's that process like for any coach? And this seems like a great example of it. Like you said, CJ's not pressed into service. You don't have to play him because you have veterans ahead of him, but yet maybe you want to see something. How difficult is it to strike that balance? What kind of process do you go through?
Yeah, you go. I mean, it's really from now, right? I'm back off the road from now until the season starts. You know, constantly tinkering and looking at things and okay, how much could he handle that's outside of, you know, a normal will linebacker position, and then it's in my thought process thinking about a season long, and then, you know, forcing myself to actually write down on paper, okay, in the first half of the season, I want to make sure he gets X amount, you know, because that'll move him.
When a guy gets that opportunity and he pops, what's the next step for a coach? Meaning, if it becomes obvious this guy is a playmaker, you know what I mean? What is that next step?
More plays, you know, more plays. I
Yeah.
think that always, it reflects on, you know, we have to have confidence in our game based on practice, right? Because we don't have many games. It's not like another sport where you can have exhibition games. So you have to have confidence based on practice. So if a guy shows you things in practice, then you give him an opportunity in the game. And if he shows you things in the game, you give him more opportunities.
Yeah,
It's that easy.
Yeah, and more plays has a trickle-down effect because somebody else is getting fewer.
Somebody else getting
Yeah.
fewer. It's like I was saying earlier, that's not a bad thing, even with our veterans, because
Yeah.
we want to play a long season. And you saw what happened to like
Yeah.
Tommy No Thumbs, you know what I mean? It's like as you get down the end, I mean, so the more that CJ can play, the more it helps us over the long haul of the season.
You mentioned CJ. Do you feel ready now going into the summer to reintroduce the Jack? 'Cause I know you kind of held that off this spring.
Yeah, I do. And maybe not even with the whole defense, but I'll be spending time with those two guys in particular, just one-on-one time, talking about the things that I want, what I want to accomplish.
CJ and Mitchell, right?
Yeah.
And how much can we be done with that before you get back to actual practice? How much of that is in the film room exercise?
A lot, tons, right? Because that's a position when fully developed where that guy knows everything about the defense and everything about the call. So a lot of that is one-on-one time with me and that player or those two players. So that when it wants to go on the defense, even if there are other guys that aren't quite 100% comfortable, that guy has a full command of it. He's kind of running around making the calls.
What were those mental gymnastics like for you last year where Mitchell Melton, a lot of people thought might be that guy, and then, he tried to get it out of Jack. But my point is, we're the new team, new players playing against other new teams.
Yeah.
And, people are creatures of habit, even coaches. I mean, you're trying to meld your system, right, to fit it. What was that like for you?
Yeah, it's just a lot of work, a lot of study, and you're right. Sometimes you can't. When you're in the middle of the forest, you don't see the forest through the trees, So
Yeah.
you go back to things. Because by the time I left Oklahoma State, that package was because I went back and looked at it,
Yeah.
And after the season, go back and look, okay, what was good, and that's practically all we did. That's practically all we did.
Yeah.
But they were different players, different guys, And as we used some of it here, it just wasn't as popping. It wasn't popping.
Right.
I'm saying it wasn't ineffective, but it wasn't popping. It wasn't
Yeah.
jumping off like when you watched the things at Oklahoma State. You went, wow, that was great. So, gradually just pulled back on it because it doesn't matter what I know. It matters what works and what the players do.
Yeah.
So you just pull back.
When you think statistically, at least at Oklahoma State, your defense has got better every year. Why is that? Is that you implementing more? Is it the players absorbing more? I'm sure it's some combination of the two, but how would you explain, and did you really feel that beyond the stats, every year the defense is getting better and better and better?
Yeah, I felt it. I think it is less about me implementing more, although it's always there, right? And it's just a little bit of an injection here or there as they can handle it to get it up. But it's more about how the players understand, so that you want everyone on the defense to know what everyone else does. You want everyone to know where the ball is going to end up. When I make a call based on the play the offense runs, the ball is going to go here. I mean, that's as simple as it gets. It looks more complicated, but if you know, because every defense has a hole or an escape hatch or some part of it in it. So that's how they get better. And I believe, I think with like a guy like Tommy, take Tommy for example, you saw that it accelerated, right? Because he was a guy who really picked it up. The guy, I use the word Gretzky all the time. You probably heard me say it, but I keep saying it because it's, hey, Wayne Gretzky, why are you such a great goal scorer? It's because I didn't go where the puck was, I went where it was going to be. So Tommy figured it out a little more quickly maybe some other guys. That if I made this call and they ran this play, the ball was going to end up over here. So that's how you play fast. So when you get 11 guys who can do that, that's
Yeah.
how you get better.
I know you could never blame players. I mean, I know coaches don't do that, but the last two games, the big plays are really what stung, and almost every one of them you could see either just a physical guy slips or something, or a bad decision or something,
Yeah.
and Katie barred the door, right? I mean,
Right.
has that haunted you the last several months, or is it, how do you fix that? I mean, obviously it's coaching. You coach a guy to be in position and also to make the play. I mean, explain what that thought is.
Yeah, I mean, it's yes, it's haunted me, but just haunting me, that doesn't do anybody any good, except it just keeps it. So if it's a problem, you got to fix it. You got to take responsibility, take accountability. Then you have to say, okay, why did this happen? Like you said, it was a matchup or somebody just not doing something right. Well, that all comes back to me, and I have to. So yeah, you kind of go back to the start. You look at everything. You look at your teaching progression, and then you have to learn. Then you say, okay, we're in matchup games. Those were 2 matchup games.
Yeah.
We did not. I did not get the job done. So then you have to say, okay, how do I do a better job of, from the start, planning out the defensive progression for those matchup games.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So you got to go. You got to go back to the beginning. Anytime you try to do something that's a stopgap or something that's just for that week, to me, you're doomed for failure. It's got to become part of your progression. It's got to be in your mind from the start. Is okay. How do the things that didn't go well last year? How do I, from day one, start to make sure that doesn't happen?
And what I'm linking to, Georgia had this vaunted defense last year. They had a tough night too. You understand what I'm saying? It's a 1-point game, and I think you saw that.
Yeah, and we went back to we had a great what was it, third quarter, right?
Yeah.
Shut them out.
Yeah.
Because I went back to some things that I know works.
Yeah.
And then
But if
I didn't get out of those things quick, and you know what I
Yeah.
mean. Then
Yeah.
it stayed in that too long. So it's
Yeah.
a chess match, but
Well, if you know if a guy's going to fall down, you don't call that deep. You know what I mean?
that was I need to do a better job.
But I wanted to follow up on it. Nick Saban said, recently that the day of just shutdown defense. I mean, you may have seen that where the day of shutdown defenses are thinking you're going to have defense. And this is a defensive guy, or long gone. I mean, what is just your reaction to that? But I mean, there is some truth in that, right?
He knows what he's talking about. I mean, he's obviously the best who's ever done it. So, yeah, there's a lot of truth to it, but I believe we have to keep coaching our guys. That's you cannot. What are you gonna say? It's okay if we give this or that up. It's not. So you just keep pushing for perfection, even if you know it's not possible. You keep driving it that way.
You said
Boy, I always enjoy conversations with Jim Knowles. I think that comes out almost in the enthusiasm with which I ask questions and others ask questions of him, because this guy is always thinking, very intelligent, knows things didn't go according to Hoyle completely last year with that 4-2-5 defense. He's looking forward to streamlining that in some respects. You just get that idea, right, Andy, this year, knowing what he's got coming back, basically spending a year not only with those guys, but with the coaches, a little change up there in the coaching staff where Tim Walton is kind of in charge of all the defensive backs, basically coordinating that aspect of it with Perry Eliano, the safeties coach, and then, of course, Larry Johnson, the venerable GOAT, and that returning group of defensive linemen. I think they feel like they've really got something to work with this year, as opposed to maybe scratching their head a lot like they did last year. You lose Mitchell Melton, the guy you had pegged as being that jack linebacker is what I call him, that versatile guy. You lose him in the spring, and they don't get to that with, like you pointed out, Jack Sawyer just didn't really fit that bill, the defensive end. Now they've got more people in positions, and it started out with that conversation about C.J. Hicks, right? And I think you agree with me about C.J. Hicks. He kind of proved in the spring he belongs on the field somewhere at some point in some games, right?
Yeah, Jim Knowles said he's ready to be unleashed. And I think everyone was kind of waiting for that to be said. It hadn't really been said that explicitly before. And it's been tossed around that maybe he could play the jack. But I don't think last week it had been so clear that that is the intent at this point, to try to help get him onto the field. Now, Jim Knowles also said he could play the typical linebacker role in a rotational capacity. Of course, Tommy Eichenberg and Steele Chambers are the starters there. And then Cody Simon is typically the third linebacker in that mix.
Mm-hmm.
But it wouldn't be too surprising to see a little bit of CJ Hicks in that role, especially in the second half of games. A lot of times Ohio State gets a big lead, and we could see CJ in that role. Last year, he was just purely playing special teams. Jim Knowles was asked if he regretted not playing him more at linebacker. He said no. He said that he felt like that was the right decision for his development. And it kind of feels like that's the way Jim Knowles is going, looking back at last year. It's not as much as regret. It's more of learning from what happened and trying to apply this season and try to do things a little bit differently.
Yeah, you heard when I asked him if he was haunted to a certain extent by those last two games of the season, the loss to Michigan and then the loss to Georgia. And basically, said, I'm just paraphrasing here, but of course he is, because bottom line is when they needed to make a play or stop something when it was really critical, it didn't get done in either one of those games. And as you and I talked about before we jumped to that interview with Jim Knowles, the third quarter was definitely something they could hang their hat on. But, it's a 4-quarter game, and you heard me bring up with him too in that snippet that Nick Saban, the venerable Nick Saban, maybe who will go down in history, at least in a couple of, maybe about 5 or 10 years from now, as up to that point, the greatest college football coach of all time, based on winning national championships on the field. There's never been anyone better, although that's only been going on since 1998. But in a true sense of matching 1 versus 2 or having a college football playoff. But he even, he made a comment earlier this spring that the idea that you're going to have just big shutdown defenses anymore with all of the advantages that are afforded offenses now is basically out the window. And you heard what Jim Knowles said. That's basically he agrees with that, but you can't stop working toward that perfection, as he calls it. And that is and like you pointed out, Nick Saban is basically the best to ever do it to this point, but you keep working to try to have that perfect defense, right? And I think Ohio State's got the pieces to be so much more improved on defense. Do you agree with me on that?
I do. And we look at Jim Knowles' track record. He's rebuilt defenses before. He's coordinated at Western Michigan, at Duke, most recently at Oklahoma State. His first year at Oklahoma State, the defense allowed 32.5 points per game. His last year there, 18.1 points per game.
Wait a minute, let me interrupt. And ladies and gentlemen, that was in the Big 12, where it's almost like basketball. Go ahead.
Right. A lot of points scored, and they were a college football playoff contender that final season. He was there. There was a jump between year 1 and year 2. It feels like he has his pieces in place now. He has a better idea of the talent. I think that's what stood out to me. He said he understands more of the talent that is around him. When you're at a school like Oklahoma State, and quite frankly, a lot of the programs, even in the Power 5, yes, you're in the Power 5, but you're dealing with a lot of 3-star recruits, maybe some 4-star recruits. You do not have the talent pool that Ohio State has. And that means that you have to get more creative with scheme to account for differences in speed and power up front. And you have to find ways to even out the playing field against some of the blue bloods that do have the talent that Ohio State has. Well, now it seems like he has a better understanding of what he has around him. He has the pieces in place to apply that personnel to the scheme rather than having the scheme dictate the personnel. And I think that shift will allow the defense to just have a better ability to maximize the talent that's here.
Yeah, I agree. And, if they can just get some stability too, which I think they will at the cornerback spots, for example, we know about all the injury situations they were dealing with last year, guys playing hurt, Denzel Burke, et cetera. If you can just get some, continuity there, consistency of who's showing up and are they pretty healthy to play. Jordan Hancock missed most so much of the regular season because of injury. He's right there, number 3 on that list, in my opinion, maybe challenging for maybe one of the starting spots. And then, of course, Davis and Igbinosun, the depth that they bring just to that room of quality depth that you hope stays healthy. I think if you're their coaches, there are so many things that can make this defense so much better than it was a year ago. I mean, I could go on and on and on and on about people being more familiar with the system, of more than just Tommy Eichenberg being able to fire off and totally understand what Jim Knowles is looking for from a consistency standpoint, from play to play, recognition of plays going on in front of them, and understanding how that particular defensive call is geared to go against whatever the offense is just thrown at them. Those half-second pauses are huge on a football field now. They're like basically equal to almost 5 yards, of a differential. It creates space situations. So, I think everything's looking up for that. And the other thing that stands out about Jim Knowles is that self-awareness of the evolution of his 4-2-5. It's like you just pointed out, the players he's dealing with. The 4-2-5 down in Oklahoma State was, opposing offenses had trouble, especially in that last year when he was down there, just really dealing with the what's the word I'm looking for there? The unpredictability of the defense that they were going against. You can play a little more straight up when you've got big time players, and that's what you were alluding to. You don't necessarily have to have that trickeration. Whoever said that before, the trickeration part of the defense. But boy, it's a luxury when you can throw it at somebody out of nowhere. And I think that's what you're going to see. Not necessarily a conservative approach to defense, but a line up and get after it approach with occasionally throwing curveballs at people. Agreed?
Yeah, well, the jack was used pretty much almost exclusively every down at Oklahoma State that final season. And even at Ohio State, they want to use it more than they did last year. I think he estimated it was around 15 to 20% of the snaps. He wants it up to 40 to 50%, but they're not going to get to where they were at Oklahoma State just because they don't need to. The defensive line is too talented. You can have 4 down linemen and be fine and getting pressure even without a jack. So I think things are just different by circumstance there, but certainly he's being more malleable with this scheme that he's brought over from Stillwater, because he basically is looking at this and he's looking at the nickel position. That's been talked about a lot this offseason, probably even more so than the jack.
Yes.
And instead of just looking at it as 3 safeties in the back end paired with 2 corners, now that nickel spot is kind of an X factor where it could be a nickel, or it could be a nickel safety, it could be a nickel corner. And that's where we've seen a lot of different players fit in that role in the spring. We've seen Sonny Styles play there, and they put him up close to the line of scrimmage where he can defend the run, he can blitz, and he kind of hovers right along that line of scrimmage. They've also put him at the high safety spot, so he's another guy that they can kind of play around with. But then also we've seen Cam Martinez more in that corner nickel slot where he's better for coverage, and he almost looks more like a corner and can match the speed of some of the better aerial attacks in the Big Ten. So I really think we're not going to see the same 3 safeties starting every game like we did last year most of the year, given health. But you're going to see matchup-based starters at that nickel spot, and even series by series based matchups, in which is, whatever is advantageous for Ohio State, you'll see Jim Knowles going that direction. So that's a way to get more guys playing time. That's a way to have just better, having guys in better positions at the right times. That was a big problem last year. Well, they're going to try to avoid that with this kind of thinking there at that nickel spot. And the other thing I will say, you brought up Tommy Eichenberg and the anticipation of where to be at the right time. And Jim Knowles talked about that. It's almost like if you could have 11 Tommy Eichenbergs on the field at once, that's the goal for year 2 of this defense, because a big reason why Tommy Eichenberg made the step up from this 2021 season to 2022 was he started to play more proactive than reactive. He was starting to find the right spot. He knew where the ball was going to go, and then he got there and he made the play. he's not the fastest guy, he's not the most athletic guy, but he had the cerebral awareness to be able to pick the spots of where to go. And they're hoping that with the second year, the defense, more players will be like that.
Yeah. Kind of like a great center fielder at the crack of the bat, you know where the ball's going, and if you can get 11 center fielders out there, wow, you'd have something. Bottom line is, though, like I said, a great pass rush, boy, a great front four, getting after it from play to play, altering plays almost from the snap of the ball. That helps you out immensely also. And I didn't mention Jair Brown when I was talking about the corners a while ago. I really, truly believe they have found a way to get him on the field like you were talking about. And now you have 5 corners who I think you feel like you can put on the field coming out of the spring. That's the sense I got from it. Did you get that same sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that the one thing that can't be understated is the importance of bringing in Davison Igbinosun and also Jahad Carter, of just elevating the competition level. These are both players who have started in different Power 5 conferences. Jahad Carter was a 3-year starter in the ACC, an all ACC performer. And then you have Davison Igbinosun, who started 10 games as a freshman in the SEC for Ole Miss.
Yeah.
And so those are 2 players that, regardless if they're starting day one or not, I think they're going to be in the rotation. And regardless of the playing time, they're increasing that competition, which drives players like Denzel Burke, Jordan Hancock, Jair Brown, the whole lot to be better. And I think that's what the coaches have said. Those defensive backs have been better this spring. There have been more hands on balls. There has been a better sense of speed and understanding of the defense of where they're supposed to be back there. So both of those transfers are huge for this group, no matter how much they play, just because they're there driving that competition.
Yeah. And let's not leave out Tywone Malone too. I mean, the defensive tackle transfer also from Ole Miss, originally from New Jersey, just like Davison Igbinosun. We'll see. The proof will be in the pudding, right? But I think those were 3 really excellent additions through the transfer portal and or senior transfer, whatever you want. Jahad Carter had that capability, but I thought all 3 hit the mark. You agree with that, don't you?
You're always going to need depth on the defensive interior. And I think that was kind of going under the radar. I mean, the coaches talked about that. Ryan Day said it was one of the bigger concerns at the end of spring ball, was that they felt like they needed more depth. They had those 3 stalwarts up front with Mike Hall, and you had Tyleik Williams and Ty Hamilton. But beneath that, there was this gap where they needed someone to come in to be able to give guys like, Hero Canoe more time to develop. You can't just force players into the action. You need to have a little bit of a gap there to bridge. And I think Tywone Malone will serve that purpose and could end up making a big impact, because, as we know, injuries are quite prevalent in the trenches at times. And certainly, I think the one transfer that we've already touched on that gets really just not recognized as much as they should is Jahad Carter. And I think, part of the reason why is he didn't play in the spring game. He got hurt on Student Appreciation Day with a knee injury, but he seems to be fine now, and he should be ready for fall camp and be a full go. And Jim Knowles talked glowingly about his work ethic. He's someone that came in with no expectation of the amount of playing time that he would get. He's been very coachable in his time at Ohio State, which is rare for someone that started already 3 seasons for another Power 5 team. And I think that what makes him so special is that he's versatile. You can play him at nickel, you can play him at the adjuster, you can play him at the bandit. So plug and play, as Perry Eliano said, is so much easier in the second year of a system, because you have an understanding of where guys are going to go and the mechanism of the scheme at this point. And so I think Jahad Carter is someone that we didn't maybe talk about as much in the spring, but I do think that he will be a big factor at some point this season.
Appreciate it. Andy, I always enjoy conversations with you, and just like the Tywone Malone thing. I mean, Mike Hall, boy, did he flash last year, but man, was he limited from a injury standpoint. If you can just add another quality, big, get after it kind of dude in there, which I think Tywone Malone is. You watch him on video, and he's I'm not equating him with Jalen Carter by any stretch, but he kind of plays a little bit like him, kind of stalemate, and then boom, he can go right by you. There's a two-gap dude, in my opinion, that could play in a couple of spots up there up front and really just mainly give you that quality depth you're looking for. Because boy, if you can get after with that front four, it just fixes a lot of problems behind you, or masks a lot of problems behind you, because it never gets to that point, So we'll see. I really do expect this to be a much improved defense. And, right out of the gate, they're playing at Indiana, come home, play Youngstown State, but Western Kentucky, before Ohio State even goes to Notre Dame, Western Kentucky will be a great litmus test on whether the past defense of this defense has gotten its act together. I think you agree, right?
Yeah, I think that's overlooked. That's a good point, Tim. Sometimes people go immediately to the Notre Dame game, as that's where we're going to learn a lot about this team. Well, the defense will really decide where this team can go. I think the offense at some point will get it together. And yeah, if Western Kentucky is an issue for this pass defense, it'll be a sounding of the alarm for things that could come, because hey, that Notre Dame pass offense is not the same as it was last year. They got Sam Hartman back there slinging the ball, who has all sorts of ACC records, career passing records out there. So it's a different Notre Dame team coming week 4, and that week 3 matchup, as you mentioned, is a good test.
Isn't it funny that Tyler Buckner could end up being Alabama's starting quarterback, a guy who was basically figured out he wasn't going to be the starter again at Notre Dame, barring catastrophe? We're living in a really strange world, aren't we, Andy?
It's the power of relationships. Offensive coordinator leaves, goes somewhere else. That can be it. Quarterback coaches, offensive coordinators, that's all mixed into the world of NIL, transfer portal, decision-making, power of the players. They want to go where the guys know them and they have a relationship.
Yeah. Wow. It's just strange though. I mean, basically based on the way things were even 10 years ago. But ladies and gentlemen, that's the Tim May Show for this week. I appreciate Andy Backstrom, my quite capable co-pilot, as you folks are learning. And you know what, Andy, until next week, we'll see you then.
Yep. See you then. Thanks, Tim.